Martin Scorsese's The Irishman is the film director's last gangster movie, telling the story of mafia hitman Frank Sheeran, who worked for the Teamsters Union boss Jimmy Hoffa and underworld boss Russell Bufalino. A veteran of the gangster genre, Scorsese, who has made films like Mean Streets, Goodfellas, Casino, Gangs of New York and The Departed, brought together much of his old crew for this picture, including his old regular partner Robert De Niro, who he hadn't worked with since Casino, as he was replaced by Leonardo DiCaprio as Scorsese's leading man. Harvey Keitel, Scorsese's original leading man, was in the film for his first Scorsese flick in about 30 years. Everyone's favourite sweary man, Joe Pesci, came out of retirement for the film, and The Irishman marked the first collaboration between two giants of cinema, Scorsese and Al Pacino. Given who the actors and director are, given the ages, given the fact that the gangster genre has had its heyday, and even the very story of the film itself, that of an old man looking back on his life full of regret and reflection, gives the movie a very somber feel. It is a curtain closer for the gangster genre, for the career of these legends, and for Scorsese's own filmography. It's a fitting bookend to his Italian-American gangster pictures. Mean Streets, concerning young hoods and thugs in Little Italy, Goodfellas, mob associates climbing the ladder, Casino, made guys and bosses running entire cities, and then The Irishman, bosses who have grown old and frail. It's an ode to the gangster film, its final curtain call. The reputation of The Irishman, I think, is excellent. I don't think it's hailed as a masterpiece by most, but at the same time it isn't considered a bad film in general. IMDb has its score at 7.8 out of 10, it has a Metascore of 94 out of 100, its Rotten Tomatoes critic score is 95% and the audience score is 86%. So people like it. Then why am I making a video called Why You're Wrong About the Film, where I am defending it from criticism? Well, it can't be ignored that there's huge swathes of people online who hate The Irishman. Whenever the film is brought up, it always seems to generate comments about how disappointing it is, how Scorsese dropped the ball on this one. Loads of criticism comes about, trashing the film. It's gotten to a point where I can't really make a video on the movie, even though at one point pretty much this entire YouTube channel was dedicated to The Irishman. And the reason is because if I make a video on it, the comments won't be about the video subject, but about how shit the film is. The comment section is usually bombarded with people saying they hate the movie, and today I wanted to push back a little, because I think some of the criticism is not legitimate and is unfair. And I'm not going to talk about the positives of the film too much in this video, but rather focus on the criticisms. Of course, it goes without saying that if you don't like a movie, you don't like it. And The Irishman is not a perfect movie, it has flaws, for sure. Some of which are so great, some people might not be able to get into the movie. You don't have to like it, sure. And I'm not coming at this from the angle of a blind fanboy, I think I've proven that. For instance, before the film even came out on Netflix, so before most of the world had seen it, I watched it on the limited theatre run they did for the movie, and in my review I criticised many elements of the film, elements which would dominate the discourse around the movie, like the de-aging CGI or the grocery store beatdown. So it's worth mentioning the angle that you approach the movie could seriously affect your enjoyment. I understand that a lot of people love De Niro and Pacino's crime films of old. Heat, Casino, Donnie Brasco, Goodfellas, Once Upon a Time in America, Scarface, you name it. And to have grown up with these films and then watched a slow, long movie about an old man in a wheelchair falling down in his hallway after going to the toilet or forgetting which order his medication is in can be a bit of a shock. When the man who made the roller coaster thriller-minute ride of Goodfellas made this film, it can be perplexing. But let me tell you the angle I came from when I watched it. As well as being a fan of those legendary movies, I also regularly watched De Niro and Pacino's crappy output of the 2000s. Movies like Righteous Kill, Jack and Jill, and all sorts of horror I had to endure to desperately search for a decent film these guys did. It got to a point where I sat back and thought to myself, what the hell am I doing? Watching all these shitty films, genuinely wasting my time, gaining no enjoyment. The actors don't care, either that or they've lost their touch. So I stopped watching altogether, hoping that this abstract crime film called The Irishman, De Niro talked about once every 2 years, would actually get made. And then when it came out, it wasn't what I expected, but it floored me. These guys really did have it, and they all brought their A game for one last dance, one last great performance from each legend. There's a romanticism about the film that is undeniable. It's De Niro, it's Pacino, it's Pesci in the same film for the first and only time. And they were all the best thing about it, giving incredible performances. The film zones in on the three leads as it goes on, like it knows why you're here, and it delivers in that regard. So let's address some things. Firstly, it can't be ignored that there are some people who hate this movie or are very loud and proud in telling us they hate it, for reasons which have nothing to do with the film itself. They were rooting for it to fail for unrelated reasons. I mean, some complaints are downright weird. I've heard some people annoyed that Pesci played against the type, and we didn't get to see classic sweary Pesci. But at the same time, people complained that all Al Pacino did was swear and scream. It was like a caricature of a Pacino performance. Well, which one is it? Do you want them doing what they're known for, or doing something different? Anyway, let's start with the whole De Niro and Trump thing. I never really spoke about this on the channel because I didn't want the comment section to become a war zone of American politics. I want this channel to be somewhere where people can put that stuff to a side and talk about movies. But with De Niro bashing Donald Trump in public in the run-up to the American elections, saying things like he wants to punch him in the face, and Trump responding in kind, there was an avalanche months on end, even now years later, on the internet and in particular in the comments section of my videos of Donald Trump fans bashing De Niro. It's clear a lot of complaints are De Niro haters wanting the film to flop. I mean, these guys weren't hiding it. They made it pretty clear. And I just find it silly. If you were aware of the political opinions of actors or things they've done in the past and whatnot that you didn't agree with, you probably wouldn't find a single film to find after you're done boycotting them all. There are murderers in Hollywood, there are paedophiles, there are people who support paedophiles. It goes back to that thing about separating the art from the artist. It was just so bizarre how De Niro's comments about Trump made some people just see red whenever they discussed The Irishman. Secondly, Scorsese made comments where he slammed Marvel movies and those kind of cookie clutter films, calling them theme park rides. The comments weren't even that harsh. What he said made a lot of sense, and things that others have said, like Francis Ford Coppola, were much more severe. But maybe it's because someone so revered and current said it, and that makes it hurt all the more. But like with De Niro, years later, even now, actors and directors from superhero movies take shots at Scorsese for his comments. They just can't let it go and move on. Clearly it hit a nerve. And he said this just before The Irishman came out, so no doubt there would be a united Marvel and DC front with their pitchforks ready to trash the movie because Scorsese criticized superhero films. Thirdly, the industry itself would have had a bias against the film. Remember, this was the early days of streaming movies. There were discussions going on about streaming companies even being allowed to be nominated for Oscars. Steven Spielberg, I remember, was against it, and there were a lot of hit piece articles against The Irishman for being made on a streaming service. There was a lot of elitist snobbery from Hollywood. A few films like Roma were nominated for Oscars a year earlier, but here was a titan of the industry who, along with his old crowd, made a movie for Netflix of all people. It sickened some people in the Hollywood industry, and it's easy to forget looking back now that movies made on streaming platforms are very normal. But The Irishman was one of the first major pictures that broke that barrier, and there was many discussions and conflicts that were happening as a result. Another bizarre complaint I see is that the events in the film are not true and that Frank Sheeran was lying. Like, who cares? Since when did everybody start caring about the historical events in movies? I remember this during the run-up to the movie, and again, I feel like a lot of these comments were smokescreens for De Niro haters and whatnot. Did people care that a lot of what you saw in Goodfellas was made up and Henry Hill was a serial liar? No, they didn't. Did people care that Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was a literal fantasy movie where Sharon Tate lives happily ever after and Hollywood is a wonderful, fluffy place where there's definitely no pedo producers behind the scenes and Tate definitely didn't have her unborn child cut out of her? No, they didn't. But all of a sudden, for The Irishman, everyone's become a historian, ripping it apart for the Sheeran not killing Hoffa thing, or Gallo, or the JFK stuff. Like, what the hell? Seriously. The story template is the basis for the character relationships in the film, which is the heart of the movie. It's like Raging Bull. Loads of liberties taken with the truth to forward the core narrative. Scorsese is on record saying the real-life events were not important to him in The Irishman. In fact, This movie lends itself perfectly to historical inaccuracy. It fits because it's being told by a lonely old man. Some parts may be true, some not true, some embellished for the sake of a good story. Who knows? He's an unreliable narrator who is telling events from his own point of view. And the whole thing with his story, being Hoffa's killer, being unbelievable, adds to it. Because that's kind of the whole point of the film. It's like there's the established narratives. This is how Hoffa died. And then there's the truth, quote unquote, which is now held by one last man who refuses to give it up. And the unreliable narrator thing makes sense when you consider there's factual errors in the film, like Alan Dorfman's death date, or that Salerno was not the boss of the family, Vincent Gigante was. But again, that adds to the effect because in Sheeran's limited capacity, he would have known Salerno as the boss and he wouldn't have known that Gigante was the actual boss. It's the same with the actors' ages. It doesn't matter how old an actor is, what matters is if it works on screen. Liotta was too old to play a young Ray Liotta in Goodfellas, but they did it anyway. Joe Pesci was playing a 20-year-old something in Goodfellas when he was about 40. It doesn't matter. What matters is the presentation. Did it work in the final film? Is it convincing? So, let's talk about the de-aging CGI. Yes, it is not perfect. Yes, if you are going to enjoy the movie, you have to look past it. And yes, it does damage the film in places. The part with Keitel, De Niro and Pesci, for example, I never got a sense that I was seeing all three sitting there at the table. I never got that kind of gravitas from the scene. It felt like De Niro, Keitel, and then this alien blob in between them, masquerading as a Joe Pesci impersonator. There's a lot that can be said about the CGI. Scorsese was aware there were more effective methods, but he spoke about not wanting the actors to walk around with helmets. Being able to play off with each other was very important for him. Should Scorsese have used younger actors? Well, his response is that looking at the script, if he used younger actors for the younger scenes, he'd hardly have a lot of time to work with the likes of De Niro and Pacino, which was part of the whole point of the film. So there's definitely things we can say about whether they should have done this, should have done that. Ultimately, the CGI is very wonky in places. At others, it's not so bad. And if you allow it to, your mind can get used to it, and as the film goes on, you notice it less, and this coincides with the effects getting better as the actors are slowly aged up. Though there were some clear decisions they got wrong, like De Niro's eyes being digitally altered blue. They should have used contact lenses like when he's old. Also, it's worth mentioning that some instances of de-aging are so good you probably didn't notice it, like the fact that Pacino was de-aged throughout the entire movie, even his final scene. But the de-aging is pretty great there, even if more eagle-eyed viewers will feel an uncanny valley element. But I'm not going to fight you on the CGI. It didn't hit the mark, but in truth, it didn't harm the film for me as much as it did for others. If it's a choice between having The Irishman as it is, or Scorsese saying, nope, we can't do the movie, scrap it, I'll take the film the way it was made. It's also a generational thing, probably. Maybe that's why Scorsese and the like were so impressed with it. Older people who grew up with Scorsese films that I showed the movie to, were not distracted by the CGI. But people who are more familiar with digital effects, younger people, noticed it more, I think. I could say that some people who complain about the CGI are being hypocritical, because they'll just as easily tune into a Fast and Furious film with fake-looking effects, or a Star Wars film with wonky CGI. But a counter-argument would be that those films are a different kind of movies. Those are movies where wonky special effects are more accepted. And ironically, those are the films that Scorsese was criticizing. Although, if you do make that argument, that is kind of an admission to what Scorsese was saying about Marvel movies, that they are different, as earlier said in the video. Anyway, let's talk about the grocery store beatdown. Or let's not, because I have no defense for this. I've spoken about it at length in other videos. It's the worst scene of Martin Scorsese's career. I've seen all of his movies, and I cannot conceive of the fact that he watched this back and thought, yup, that looks good. And it's on him, not De Niro. De Niro picked up Zac Efron with his hands on his back for a promo shot of another movie. The man is really fit for his age, and I'm sure it could have worked if filmed differently. A close-up, sticking with the reaction shot of the girl while we hear the bumps and knocks. There's so many alternative ways it could have been done. There is just no excuse. The execution is horrific. But if you can see the point of the scene, it's about his daughter being horrified at what he is. It's an inverse of that part in Goodfellas where Henry beats the guy and it turns Karen on. Here the violence disturbs Sheeran's daughter. Maybe Scorsese wanted it to be unflashy, to be wonky and awkward like a lot of real fights are. No music, it's not cool, he just beats him up and walks away. You can see what he was trying to do, but it was an epic fail because it comes off as laughable. One thing I will say though, and I know the scene is bad, but honestly I'm sick of the way it's constantly brought up whenever people discuss the movie. You might want to talk about Frank's regret or Hoffa's ego or something else, and people would just spam about the beatdown scene. It's bad, we all know, but ultimately it's a 30-second scene in a 3.5-hour film. I mean, if The Godfather came out today, would people ignore the movie's qualities and just focus on Sonny's phantom punch? Let it go. Also, and this is briefly mentioned but quite late into the movie, but De Niro's character had health issues, arthritis that was caused from being in the foxholes in the war, for example. He never really looked like a young man as we envisage, even when he was young. People laugh at the fact that a 70-year-old Pesci calls a 70-year-old De Niro a kid, but it's actually mentioned in the book the film is based on that Sheeran found it weird how he wasn't that much younger than Bufalino, but he kept referring to him as a kid. And those who complain about De Niro's stammering in the film might be interested to learn that Sheeran had a stutter. But of course, I can't expect audiences to know that unless they read the book. Maybe they should have had a line somewhere in the film where Sheeran wonders why Bufalino keeps calling him a kid. There's also the fact that people laugh at De Niro supposedly playing a 20-year-old and only de-aged to look 50. Ha 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 ha. But aside from the World War II flashback, the youngest he is in the film is mid-30s. And that's not what mid-30-year-olds look like in today's world, but mid-30s in the 50s of a man who spent 411 days in active combat duty. He's not going to look like Brad Pitt. And that does bring me to the fact that the movie doesn't help itself at times. The worst instance of de-aging CGI, in my opinion, was the first instance, when you get the instant flashback of De Niro in the truck. I remember being in the cinema thinking, ouch! Surely you want to wow audiences off the bat, show off a really good instance of de-aging tech early on. The movie is also very slow early on. That part where De Niro drives the car slowly around the laundry, a scene where Pacino literally slowly dozes off in bed. Then you have the store beatdown and a few other wonky scenes, and you may have lost your audience by the halfway mark when the film actually starts getting really good. At that point, a lot of the de-aging becomes less significant. It's like they can ditch the CGI, the build-up of Sheeran's life, because they needed that, and now they can tell the story they want to tell. Then there are those people who call the movie slow, long, and boring. I mean, boring is subjective. I found Once Upon a Time in Hollywood boring, each to their own. And the length. I mean, come on. People were so giddy when they found out the movie was 3.5 hours long. They were like, wow, a Scorsese film that long with De Niro, Pacino, Pesci. And if you can sit through a 4-hour Snyder cut of Justice League, or binge watch an entire season of a Netflix show in one sitting, you can surely take this. But if you think the movie is slow, it may be because you approached it thinking that Scorsese was going to make Goodfellas again. He spoke a lot about how this movie wouldn't be Goodfellas. I mean, why would it be? He made that film 30 years ago. He's a different person now. The movie is about an old man reflecting on a wasted life, on his values, thinking about death and the afterlife, which is where Scorsese is now. The Irishman is exactly the kind of gangster film an 80-year-old would make. Somber, reflective. It's actually a stripped-out antithesis of Goodfellas. It's what Unforgiven is to The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Even the opening scene, the long take in the old people's home. Take a look at this complaint I saw online. Underwhelming is what I think of it. It has all the trademarks of a Scorsese movie, but it's not backed by a very interesting script. Take the initial scene, the usual steady camera shot with no cuts. We followed the camera around for a big reveal, and where does it land us? To a sitting old man. It's like Netflix told Scorsese what they wanted without caring if it fitted or not, and Scorsese took the big check and complied. But that's the point! Scorsese has said that the scene is a deliberate riff off the famous Copacabana shot in Goodfellas. What the complainers said about it is exactly what it set out to achieve. The movie is not made by the man who made Goodfellas. That man retired after The Wolf of Wall Street. This is made by the guy who made Silence, who made Killers of the Flower Moon recently, whose next film is a Jesus biopic. The point being is that Scorsese has evolved and he's in a different place now to where he was 30 years ago, and it shows in his movies, his characters and themes he explores in his films. It is actually a point very well worth making that many things people don't like about the film are intentional. People arguing and dying over ice cream and wearing shorts to a meeting. It sounds stupid, but that's the point. It's highlighting the mob codes for the absurdities they are. Didn't you notice Pesci laughing when Pacino complains to him about Tony Pro and the ice cream? The mafia makes mistakes in this film. They kill Sally Bugs because someone forgot to tell someone something. The Joe Gallo hit is clumsy and all over the place. Sheeran didn't hit him right and Gallo hobbles out of the restaurant because that's how murders often are in real life. I know some people feel the first half of the film is like a greatest hit retread of what he's done before, and that's fair, but it's necessary to go through all that for the ending to work. We need to feel like it's a full life lived, rushed past until Sheeran finds himself as an old man in a wheelchair. The scene where a frail Pesci and De Niro and the grape juice in jail wouldn't have the same effect if you didn't have the mirror scene of them early at the prime of their lives. These powerful forces of nature reduced to old men. De Niro picks out his own casket, knowing nobody will come to his funeral. He falls in the hall and doesn't call out for help because there's nobody there. The rug is pulled from beneath your feet, the glitz and glamour of Goodfellas and Casino laid bare for the emptiness it is. Sheeran's notion of a code and following orders and whatnot. In the end, he's just a rotten old criminal having alienated his family. He was a killer who put all his energy into blindly following orders and pleasing the wrong crowd. In the end, he's left alone, wondering if it had any value. Remains of the day style. The movie is told from the stoic henchman's point of view, the faceless, unimportant background character who adds nothing of value and never questioned his choices until it was too late. His only contribution being killing a man who had actual value. And even at the end, he can't bring himself to feel remorse for most of the murders he's done. There's only a hint at regret over making the phone call to Hoffa's wife, reassuring her after he's killed her husband. The nurse doesn't even know who Jimmy Hoffa is, and we just watched 2 hours of Hoffa being the center of Sheeran's life. That's how unimportant Sheeran's life is. It makes you think about your own life. What will I look back on? What will I cherish? Is what I value now the same as what I will value on my deathbed? It's like the scene in The Sopranos where Junior with dementia is told he and his brother ran New Jersey, and he's like, "We did? That's nice." And that's all his life means in the end. It's a fantastic concept, and the entire film builds towards the last half an hour. What happens when the classic Scorsese protagonist grows old after the credits start rolling? And it's intentionally emotionally distant. It doesn't manipulate its audience, treat you like a sucker with dramatic sad music or anything. It allows you to come up with your own opinion of Sheeran, whether you're happy that he's suffering as an old man getting punishment, or whether you feel for him. Al Pacino was on fire in this film. Joe Pesci gave us a quiet and reserved, powerful performance, showing us he was capable of something different, and De Niro quietly carries the movie. The Irishman gives us some of the best scenes of Martin Scorsese's career. Pesci and De Niro up in the hall on Frank Sheeran Appreciation Night, De Niro's phone call with Hoffa's wife, Frank's desperate attempts to get Hoffa to see reason, Bufalino telling Frank it's gonna happen either way. The movie is full of amazing character moments and improv, and we get gems if you notice, like De Niro wishing Joe Gallo's bodyguard a happy birthday. So I think we'll end it there. I didn't actually think the video was going to end up this long. Originally, I just wanted to address a few complaints. What did you think of The Irishman? Were you someone who was disappointed with it? Has this video made a difference to your opinion? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for more videos, and thanks for watching.